And so when we talk about unionizing, ideally it's also something that it's done as quickly as is safe, as quickly as is reasonable. And that may be frustrating. It may mean the pain has to continue for a little while longer. But we don't, like, the goal is not to just lose Blizzard. Like, there are people that say that, like, just light it all on fire. That's a huge loss.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose Blizzard.
It's easier to burn it all down than to try to incrementally improve things, right?
I would much rather incrementally improve things.
It's always true.
But that comes from a guy who would buy a 100-year-old house. Like,
there you go.
That's way harder. It's way harder. Tearing it down and building new is way easier, but it's a huge loss.
Yeah.
And you also risk,
just
to say, like, when you burn everything down, you create fertile ground to grow something anew, but you lose control of that. Like, you don't burn it all down, then create a nice, structured, perfect version of what you want to make. Like, things will be chaotic, and in that chaos, worse things or all sorts of things can grow. You know, that's what typically.
It's interesting because you bring up some really good points, and we've seen that hidden cost come in over the course of the last decade. Ninja was kind of trending with a video of his this last week talking about how his general rule is he's just never alone with a woman that is not his wife. And we've also seen rising rates of like loneliness, especially within women after Me Too. And I heard somebody say this, I don't know how accurate it is, but it's that the real winners of the Me Too movement were the rapists, because they're still out there raping people, and guys are afraid to talk to girls, and girls are lonely because guys aren't approaching them. And it's like, yeah, that sucks. And I saw like people just trying to dunk on, Tyler for his view of not hanging out with women who aren't his wife. And I'm like, dude, that sounds like a great level of defense. Like, whenever a woman walks in to any kind of, like, whether if Julie is not there, I don't have alcohol. Like, it's just a general rule that I make for my life.
I work in a job where I have a partner. I have another half to me, company wise, and my other half is a woman. She's just a couple years older than me. She's a woman. She has a boyfriend, but she's not married. And we spend, I would say, regularly 20 to 35 hours a week of our work week together, and it's just the two of us.
Right.
I am not afraid of that situation.
Correct.
When I am in a position where, I would be working with like a customer of ours, and that's a single woman, that changes the dynamic, right? And so the level of like if we were to go somewhere together, I feel she should drive in her car and I should drive in mine. She can follow me. I know where we're going or whatever. Like, I don't want that to be something where she feels threatened at any stage. Like, I want her to have that maximum autonomy, because who am I? I don't have any trust there. And it goes both ways. Like, I don't know if she's nuts. Like, and so you're right. There is a fear that's been added over the last several years that maybe 10 years ago, I would have said, she seems reasonable, and they would have all been fine. And now I don't feel that way. And I hope that advantage is working out for her just as much as me. But I don't think you have to take it to the point that I have a chance for this job, but it comes with a partner that's of a different gender than me, and so now I don't want this job. Like, I don't think there needs to be a fear of just insanity.
Unless you have news to share, you also don't have over $30 million and a very recognizable social media presence that, like somebody in a celebrity status would take. It's like, I also
can't afford the lawyer he can. And and my version of bankruptcy, his version of losing everything is still a lot better than mine.
At some point, that's also about trust.
His version of losing everything is better than my best outcome. So like, there is a difference there. He's unfortunately going to have to just live in obscurity in one of 3 billion, multi-million-dollar houses and vacation the rest of his life because he's not allowed to have a career again. I would be lucky to achieve a fraction of that if everything goes well. So like, we're not on quite the same line.
I feel like I might have a weird perspective just because a bunch of different like life experiences, but like one, I had a lot of anxiety around well before Me Too about basically all the fears around that were things that I already kind of had partly growing up in a mostly female household and like a lot of stressors and horror stories that they had gone through, but also like for me, I feel like a lot of that comes down partly to trust. Like you can't it's not about trust when it comes to talking about like social media mobs or talking about like you can't control that narrative.
Correct.
But when it comes to personal life, to me, that's about figuring out your boundaries and figuring out your relationship with your partner and what their boundaries are and trust. Like I feel like
I have no drinking with her by myself.
Right.
Like that's very different than us being in a work position, dressed this nice or nicer, working at separate desks in separate offices alongside each other, but with each other for 30 hours a week. That's very different than let's go see a show together. Like those are different.
But that's kind of like what's weird, like, because for me, like, I grew up having mostly female friends, so it's like this weird thing where like having more casual female friends in my life is, and would go like get a drink or something, is like a thing that's normal for me. But I'm not saying that everyone should be able to do that, or that like there's something wrong with necessarily what Ninja's doing. I think, but like it's what's weird is I've noticed like a prescriptivism around like that there needs to be barriers under all circumstances, as opposed to like just contextually with what is okay and normal within the confines of your life and relationship. And that's what I think I found weird maybe the most, is that it's like that there is like a norm of like having to have those lines as like the only acceptable way to protect yourself makes me sad. Because I don't think it has to be that way, but I think we'll have
it's
like
also about protecting like your significant other, right? So it's like for us, it's like, yeah, anytime, and I, it might be a shocker to people, but like sometimes people hit on me, and it's like I always kind of, it's flattering, and it's just information that I give Julie, like, hey, by the way, the so and so, said this, and we kind of get a little chuckle out of it. And for me, it's just like I just give Julie all the information, and thankfully I work from home, so I'm not, like there's nothing like that, and it's not that I would say that Julie would ever have to fear that it's like I want to step out, but I always just think about it as I'm playing defense. I'm not going to let myself, shock, because like I always find the guys who do that kind of thing are the ones who say I would never do that, and it's like, okay, like just always have that mindset, like, no, I don't want to hurt this relationship. It's obviously about respect and trying to make anybody of the opposite gender feel comfortable, but it's like, perception is is a whole different thing. Like you grew up around a lot of girls, like you might end up finding yourself in a lulled state of like, oh, this was fine. And then somebody who had a whole different experience, maybe grew up around all brothers, they're like, whoa, like that's a red flag for me. Yeah,
absolutely have 100%. So you're not wrong.
Yeah.
I think where I struggle most with it is it seemed to draw this divide where I think it further drives this divide that we can't be equal in areas of things. And there are definitely things, especially as like my wife and I talk about aging, there are things that her body's going to age differently than mine,
right?
Due to just differences in the way that our bodies work. When we look at the amount of body fat we should carry, when we look at like these things are just different. They are just fundamentally different. Men store a lot of weight on organs, and so it can cause a lot of damage really fast to carry a lot of extra weight. And so it's something I'd like to avoid starting a lot younger. But also, like when we look at muscle, I can still build muscle for a long time, especially as you have men that consider things like TRT. Like there's a ton of that, as opposed to her body won't. And like these are just scientifically backed statements. That said, that doesn't need to get so far into defining the conversation that like my mom was the primary breadwinner. She was the one who was always on the road. She was the one working. My dad was the one who taught me how to iron and how to sew buttons on pants and pick me up from school. And so these are things that here in the US are defined by traditional gender roles as SWAT. And so that's just the house I grew up in. And so like when that gets taken to this full extent where now, if there's going to be a home parent, it has to be the woman, or if there's going to be somebody that's the higher earner, it has to be the man. I disagree with those things. So I think my concern when we get into defining this is that we take one set of things that may be true and we let that expand over the entire conversation.